Hey Jessica.
How are you?
I'm fantastic.
Nice to meet you.
How are you?
I'm very well. It's so nice to be here.
And who are you?
My name is Jessica Wade. I'm originally from Ballyfermot.
Yeah.
My occupation and where I work for Tiglin Residential Treatment Centre. So I work in Pear Street. So social care worker. I do evening service manager, and we serve out 250 meals daily to homeless people. But that's one part of my life, Tommy. I'm in recovery now from heroin addiction myself. I celebrated 14 years in recovery Christmas. Mm-hmm. And I became a Christian 14 years ago as well. So those two dates are massive in my life. So my faith is a huge part of my recovery.
Tell me about the people who come to see you.
Yeah.
And getting beyond the presentation. So the presentation is a homeless person on the street who's either addicted to a substance or in some sort of psychic darkland.
Yeah.
But behind that...
Yeah. There's hope.
Yeah.
There's hope when they come to us, you know. I suppose, you know, I can relate very well with a homeless person because I was homeless myself. I was a drug addict myself. So I can communicate with them on a level that they can understand, you know. So my empathy and my love for people is because I was that person.
So you know the territory?
Yes, I know it very well. You know, there was a time when I was in my addiction and I was sent forward for trial on a drug charge. In fact, you actually had one of the judges here.
Oh, yes.
Gillian Hussey.
Yeah.
And she's a very good, dear friend today, which it's been a beautiful turnaround for my life.
Did she send you down?
She did, yeah. She did. No, she sent me forward for trial. She did, though. So, yeah, she wouldn't deal with it in the district at the time, so she sent it forward because she could only give 2 years. So I was sent forward for 3. Well, at the time, I didn't know I was going to get 3. I didn't know what I was going to get. But I was in court at the time when they sent me forward. And my dad came to the court with me. And bless his heart, you know, he spoke with the barrister and they were like, you know, what's going on? And he said, oh, she's going down today. Sure, he turned and just looked at me and he said, run. Get out of here now, he said. And I did. So I went on the run for a little bit, Tommy, and I just had to go to London and hide away for a little bit because my dad kind of gave me permission to do so.
Wow.
You know, so my life was quite chaotic and quite manic, and I was 15 years an addict before.
How old were you when that happened?
It was 23 years ago. So I'm 47 this year.
So you were early 20s?
Yeah.
And he said, run.
He said, run for your life. And I did. And I was gone on the boat. You know, full permission. My dad stepped in and took my 2 children and my mother. And they took and reared my kids for me. And I stayed over in London. And there's me thinking going over there I was going to be able to hide, get a job and do all these things.
Yeah.
And it was the worst thing I ever done because I was introduced to crack cocaine when I went over there, which that wasn't on the streets of Dublin, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, my addiction would have stemmed back in the 90s when, you know, we were all going out partying and we were all just taking coke and we were taking ecstasy and, you know, living the 90s classics lifestyle of the rave tunes and, you know, the experimental stage of addiction. Yeah, I was 17 when I started taking ecstasy, you know, and I was introduced to heroin, you know, because ecstasy being such a high intensity buzz, you know, heroin was introduced, but it was never introduced as heroin. It was introduced as smack. It was introduced as gear. There was no big label on it as heroin. We were not informed of those types of things, do you know?
What difference would that have made?
I don't think it would have made any difference, to be honest. It's just now because I'm more aware of what heroin is. You know, I don't think it would have made a difference back then, but I just didn't know that I was going to get dependent on it. That's the difference.
So when you... how bad was your addiction when you left for London?
It was, I suppose, I still worked. I still managed to work, get up and go to work, but I was smoking heroin every single day. I was on methadone prescribed by a clinic. So, yeah, my life was out of control. The only thing that I could manage was going to work, and that's only because I worked for my father in a cleaning company. And if I didn't go to work, I'd have to listen to him, so it was just best to go.
Was he aware of your addiction?
Not to the extent of it, because I always presented quite well, and I was very well at speaking, you know, but behind it I was broken. My heart was broken. And, I was trying to find myself through a world with 2 children. The father had passed away. It was horrific to try and manage and to be a grown-up and be a mother. Being so young, having me kids. I was 17 when I was pregnant on my first. 18 when I had my daughter. So that was like 2 children, and I was only 18.
What a remarkable thing to say to your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not able to, you can't say it was good or it was bad.
Yeah.
But it was powerful.
Yeah.
Run.
Yeah. He just didn't want me going into prison. He didn't know what was going to happen when I went into prison. So in saying all of that, I had to come back from London at one time, and I then was arrested and had to go in and serve my time, and I served, at that time, I got 3 years of a sentence, and I got a review after 13 months. So I had 13 months to do. So I managed pretty well within the community of the prison. I worked myself through the Docus Centre so very well. I got a job in the kitchen, so in that I was able to, I suppose, manage myself, but there was still a part of it. There was a date and I was going to be leaving, and I was still using within the prison. I was on prescribed methadone, drugs were coming in over the wall. I mean, we were quite chaotic.
Was it Mountjoy?
It was, yeah. It was the Docus Centre.
Okay.
So we kind of young, we were all up to no good within the prison, but yet we were still progressing, we were still moving, we were still trying to get out. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I do thank God for the prison officers that were there at the time when I was there, because there was one of them, Patricia Callagher, and she's a good friend today. Without her in the prison helping with the educational side of things, I don't believe I would have made it. She invested into us so much within the schooling, and because of her kindness and empathy, it was a transformation for me. But I had to leave that prison after 13 months, Tommy, and walking out those prison gates, I was homeless, still homeless. Couldn't arrive back at my mum and dad's. I felt so guilty that I was arriving back to them and the kids again. And what did that look like? I was,
But they would have taken you.
Oh, they would have, but it was just more pride and it was just more guilt that kept me away, because my mind was still chaotic.
So how did you go about building a life after you came out of prison?
I didn't. I went worse into drugs after I came out of prison. I mean, prison only prison reformed me. It didn't transform me. So there was a part of it where when I came out of prison, I started using again, and then knocking up to the family home. They didn't want me at the door because I was coming up affected, and I was, out of it. The kids, mum didn't want the kids seeing me that way, So there just became a point in my life where I actually took drugs because I didn't want to be in this world anymore. I just wanted to take my own life. I just didn't want to live, and I've had many of overdoses, my dad being there in the hospital when I woke up, but there was one time I was ready to take the drugs. I had everything ready, prepared. My mind was completely like a toothache. Suicidal thoughts all of the time because I just didn't want to be here, and I arrived into a church in Ballyferm, in the Assumption Church, and I walked in and I went into light a candle for my children, and I went into light a candle for my parents because I was ready. I'd already got a plan, And this lady, so quiet in the church, and this lady came over to me and she said to me, this lovely little sweet voice, and she doesn't know it today, but she saved me life in a sense of just what she said. I just believe it was a divine appointment. And she said to me, light a candle for yourself. And for a moment, I took my eyes off my kids. For a moment, I took my eyes off my parents. And she said, light a candle for yourself. And for a moment, I thought of myself for a minute. And I looked around in the church. Now, this is a church I made my confirmation in, and my kids made that communion in. And I was in this church many a time. But I tell you, every time I was there, it was probably out of my head. But this day, I had a revelation of God that blew my mind and changed my heart completely. I stood in the church and I looked up at all the stations of the cross. And I might have seen them before, Tommy, but this day I seen them more clearly, much, much more clearly. And I looked up and I was like, there was one here, there was one there, there was one there, and obviously this side. And I followed them all around, and it was like the story came alive to me. Now, I went in there to light a candle for my mother and for my kids. I was ready to take my life. I was having an encounter. Something was happening. And then I looked up and there was the cross and there was Jesus on the cross, and I wept and I cried. And the release I got, I felt a sense of love. I felt a sense of belonging. I just felt different. And I left the church and I threw my drugs away. And within that week was 2008. I went into treatment. And I haven't looked back.
It's a personal testimony like that is very difficult for people to feel.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about an experience which is out of the ordinary. It's not part of our daily lives.
No.
There's no way for people who haven't experienced that to get a grip on the story. It's too...
Yeah, it's probably too big for them.
It's too something. It's too... it's too of the spirit to grab onto.
Yeah.
The culture isn't receptive to those stories.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately the way things are now.
Yeah. But I do believe that my spirit was completely broken, you know, at that time. And for me, it was my truth. And it was real for me, you know. I believe that was my encounter. I believe that there was a heart change. Something happened. Something took place in my heart for me. But I look at it like this, you know, I just keep it very simple. You know, I'm not perfect, by no means. You know, my life definitely isn't perfect, by no means. But there's one thing that I do know is that, you know, my faith is in God. You know, I just believe for good things. I speak good things over my life. You know, there was a time, as I shared, I was speaking death over my life. I was speaking suicide over my life. You know, and that was 13 years ago.
I did a gig in the women's prison.
Did you?
And what struck me about it, what I remember most about it, were the different kind of groups.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you which one I was in.
So there was some African women there who were caught smuggling. There was kind of inner city, kind of rough, tough. They were kind of the criminal lesbian element in the prison. Then the kind of a couple of ordinary, decent rural country killers, and then a bunch of traveller girls.
Okay.
Now, so when you were there, would it have been the same kind of?
Very much similar. Like, I was from Ballyfermot, so it was all the Ballyer girls stuck together, but we were kind of merged in with some of the townies, some of the Talaheads and some of the Clondalkin heads, but, you know, kind of made a name for myself when I was in there myself. So, I mean, people used to come to me, so I wasn't...
How do you mean you made a name for yourself?
Well, you had to stand up for yourself, Tommy, when you were in the prison, so, you know, you just didn't...
Even in a women's prison?
Oh, I'm telling you now, you had to. Definitely, yeah, you did. The ironic thing for me was, there was one day I was in Tesco's and I just happened to see this lady. And I looked at her and I said, that's the lady that helped me in the school when I was in the Docus.
Yeah.
So I said, I'm going over to say hello to her. And I was clean and I was well. And I walked over to her and I tipped her on the shoulder and I says, Miss Callagher, how are you? And she turned and she looked at me and she said, oh my God, she said, I thought you were dead. Because that's what went out. Jessica Wade had died, you know, because I was many time in ODs. But she invited me back into the prison to speak to the prisoners. And I took my boss down with me.
Wow.
And we went in. And as we walked down the corridor, this was a corridor where prisoners were never seen down. And I'm walking down this with the governor and two of my bosses. And I happened to see the cell that I went into when I first went into the prison. And I looked and I said, can I lift up the flap to have a look in? Because I just needed to envision myself and look in at that broken little girl that I remember. And I connected so back to the emotion of it all. And I made an amends with that little girl that day.
Do you see yourself as a leader?
Born leader, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I definitely see myself as being a huge champion in recovery, 100%. You know, definitely, yeah.
Well, good luck with the work.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to me.
Thank you for having me, even though you didn't know I was coming.